And it was a sort of confirmation that these other civilizations that have visited the earth since time immemorial, there's so much in the historical record about this and in different cultures, particularly indigenous cultures that have carried this knowledge, because it's part of their teachings. It's part of, when I worked with shamans, the star connection was always incredibly important because the wisdom came from the stars, the knowledge came from the stars. They were the ancestors. They were the ones that some of the shamanic practitioners could travel to gain the knowledge and this sort of thing. And it was just a confirmation that here are other civilizations that just behind the veil are all around. There are higher frequency beings here to help us with the changes that we're going through.
I am so delighted to introduce to you a dear lady. She is, you're going to fall in love with her after you talk, to listen to her. She's Veronica Goodchild. She is here in Europe, in the south of France. She is a PhD. She's a professor emerita at Pacifica Graduate Institute. She was educated in London and in the US. She's a teacher, Jungian psychotherapist, and an author. Led by dreams, she has explored sacred sites in England, France, Greece, Peru, and Egypt. Walking one of the Camino paths in France inspired her to create her own pilgrimage journeys to develop a more conscious relationship with our earth. Together, the mystic and the archetypal stories that underlie many shrines, temples, oracle sites. These journeys have included the Magdalene mysteries in France, the bee priestess oracular tradition in Crete, and mainland Greece, and the Grail and Celtic legends in the UK. A recent trip to Egypt has rekindled an abiding interest in our galactic and cosmic origins. Veronica is the author of Songlines of the Soul, Pathways to a New Vision for a New Century, and Eros and Chaos, the Sacred Mysteries and Dark Shadows of Love. And Veronica lives in the south of France. Veronica, I am so delighted to have you with us. It is such an honor.
Oh, it's such an honor for me, and thank you very much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
So, when we were preparing for this conversation, you were in Egypt, and we were preparing via email this conversation. And you were inspired to talk about the connection to the stars. And with all this traveling, this begs the question, how did you become interested in this connection to the stars? And when we're talking about the divine feminine, what's behind this?
Well, I was also I was reading over again when I started thinking about what I wanted to say today. And you were talking about also in relationship to the divine feminine, you were talking about our sacred past. And there's nothing like Egypt for a deep dive into our ancient past. And, you know, I think always as a child, I had this fascination with the night sky. And I very early on in my childhood, when I was about 5 or 6, I had a deep experience that has stayed with me my entire life. And in some ways, I think it's the blueprint of my life. And it was when I was in the garden of my family home, and suddenly everything became very quiet. And it was as if all the noises of this world just kind of disappeared. And I saw in my vision that everything was covered in gold. Everything was covered in gold light, a bit like your beautiful wall behind you there. And in that moment, and in such moments, when the other world breaks through, you don't know if they last 2 seconds or 2 hours. But in that moment, I knew that I came from that light, and I knew that one day I would return to it. And when I was thinking about today, I was thinking, well, now that just happened so early on, this idea that we come from the stars and that one day we'll return to the stars. Or maybe we return to the stars in the lifetime while we're alive. But so I think this has been very deeply in my cells, in my cellular memory, maybe. Yeah, that's, I think, where it started. So, you know, I've reflected a lot on that experience since. You know, what was that gold light? Was it the sunlight? No, yes, no. But maybe it was an inner sun, you know, maybe it was a mystical sun, a sun that is not a sun too. So that's very much about Egypt as well.
That I find fascinating. And how do you connect this with the divine feminine? What is your, it is like the mother that we are coming from this light, or how do you experience it?
Well, I think that because the Egyptians were stargazers, they were astronomers, they loved the stars and watching the night sky. And they knew that we were intimately connected with the whole galaxy. And over the temple ceilings in Egypt, you invariably see golden stars coming out of a blue beyond. And one of the major sky goddesses in Egypt is Nut, or Nut, and her whole body is a body of stars. And the sun itself, our sun, has a whole mythology about it. It's born each day, it raises to its zenith, and then it starts into its descent to the below, to the night, to the underworld, and then it renews itself each dawn. And when you're in Egypt and you have this blazing sun, you know, I was out in Abydos and there was no rain in the 7 weeks I was there, and they never have rain. And all you have is this sun going around, this star. But it is the Great Mother. It is the Great Mother goddess that gives birth to the stars. And in this mythology about the stars, you see how nature, for the Egyptians, a bit like the Celts, they read everything through nature. But then they added the visionary, mythical imagination to it. And so that's where the stories about the stars, the stories about our connection with star systems, with the sun, with the mythology of rising and then, you know, returning. These are very, very important mythological images that are connected to many of the goddesses of the ancient world, who were goddesses of the sky, of the earth, of the underworld. And that was when, you know, life was still a unified whole. It was seen as a whole. And this, of course, is what we've lost grievously. Yeah. And a part of that has been the loss of the feminine, the loss of nature, and our connection to nature, and as much to nature as to the galaxy. And this was all originally about the Great Mother.
Beautiful. It is being the creator and the creation being one.
Exactly.
No separation.
Exactly. Yes, and there's quite a lot I'd like to say about that, because I feel we're at a time where, you know, the recovery of the divine feminine is so much part of a larger story about our reconnection to nature and to the stars, because of course the feminine was connected with the earth. The earth was matter. Woman was connected with matter. And certainly in the Judeo-Christian tradition West, other cultures as well, this is what we have become split off from, our own natures and nature outside and beyond nature to the stars. And so to me, this in a very profound way has to do with the recovery of the divine feminine.
Yes, so beautiful. Years ago, I had a terrible car accident in Brazil. We were driving through the mountains, and I could see the machinery breaking the mountains, breaking the mountains, breaking the mountains. And with my Aztec background, I was crying, and I still remember, and I cried how we were raping the earth. It was raining, and all the mud started going down. And you know why we almost died? Is because we slid in that mud. We slid in that mud, and we almost ended up in going down the mountain. And for me, it was so vivid because, of course, we almost died. It's a big deal. We almost died into being absorbed part of nature. Of what you were saying, of how separated we are from this divine Mother Earth. And it's just like making it relevant for where we are today. And this is my question, or what I would love you to elaborate. What are the implications of this, and what is the relevance for our very modern way of living?
Yes, well, this is why, particularly in Jungian psychology, which is very much my background, we learn so much by going beyond the sort of history we were taught at school to the myths, to the eternal stories that, you know, they're once upon a time stories. They're stories that were written, or for a long time, of course, oral in different cultures, but they tell the story of the universal condition. And, you know, just to think about Egypt, I mean, the major myth of Egypt, for example, is the Isis and Osiris myth. And that's a very profound story about the human condition relating. I'm just thinking to your terrible car accident and your near-death experience, in a way, that for Isis, Osiris' brother was jealous of him and murdered him. And Isis, who says she fell in love with her brother, of course, in Egypt, they all marry their brothers and their sisters and their mothers and daughters and things. And she loved Osiris from the womb. They were twins. But when he was murdered, her grief and her loss and the death of her beloved set her out on a search. And she went in search of him. And the story is all about, you know, how she found him, and how, because he was murdered again by his jealous brother almost a second time, and his body was split up into different pieces and buried in different areas. But she went on a great search to reassemble the broken parts. And out of that, a new birth came. And I think that, you know, you can hear in the words how much many of our stories are about, they begin often in this sense of loss or near death or depression or grief. And the journey that one can then take is to find all these lost parts, all these, you know, what's behind both our personal grief, but beyond that, because when you get into your personal grief, you tend to go deeper into grief on other levels. And I think what you're talking about with the divine feminine and in your experience is that you were responding to the grief of mountains being stripped for whatever, you know, mining or resources or whatever. And so you feel in your body these different levels of loss. And I think that when you can respond to that by not only working on your personal issues, but by doing what you're doing with this creative forum you're putting together to bring back the loss of the goddess, the loss of nature, the loss of the sacred feminine on many, many different levels. And this is what we're faced with today. This is what we're all, at some level, when you begin to wake up to not only your personal issues, but what's going on in the world and what's going on, in terms of our continuing raping of the earth for resources and this sort of thing, which is contributing to climate change and climate issues. This is all related to the feminine. So, yeah, that story is about bringing the pieces back together and then deciding, so where, as you said, where do we go from here?
I love that. I love that. And come to mind the other stories, in the Aztec cosmology, the moon is the feminine, and in the story Soul Broken, all the pieces are put together. And then I think of the skeleton woman of Clarissa Pinkolas Tess, that's bringing together the pieces. And this is what we're doing in these conversations, bringing together all these pieces.
Yes. It's interesting too that you mentioned, so you see how these deep universal patterns can manifest in different myths and cultures across the world with different stories, but the underlying issues and feelings and what it gives rise to are really the same, And so that's a beautiful example of that, actually. Yeah. It's interesting what you said about that, because in Egypt, the god that, particularly in relation to the stars, that I love to think about is Thoth, because Thoth, who has the ibis beak, he is the one who wonders about the cosmic mysteries, but he's also a moon god. He's considered a moon god, which I find really, really interesting. Because Nut is a sky goddess, but Geb is the earth god. And so you have this reversal in a way. And but Thoth, he has these deep thoughts and wonders about how the universe and the stars work and all of this, and astrology and astronomy. But his wife, Shishat, is the one who has a 7-pointed star on her head. And she is the one that takes the deep knowledge of Thoth and puts it into a form. She's the writer. So she puts it into a form that can be disseminated so that other people can learn about it. So I love this connection of, in a sense, divine masculine and feminine working together to create something that can become available, for many people. And so that union of gathering the pieces of the lost feminine in oneself and redeeming the masculine side too, bringing these together to give birth to something new, I think is also at the heart of what you're saying. Because when you put together a conference, an online conference, this takes work. This is bringing your vision in harmony with something, with work that you want to put out there and make available for others. So it's a beautiful thing that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's really fascinating to see how the consciousness is rising, and that we are opening our minds to this profound knowledge that somehow has been there forever, but now we have the open heart to listen.
Yes, I think that's right. It has been there forever. That's right. But it's been obscured. It got lost. It's been in the underworld. It's they say that this time is the Kali Yuga time, the time when the consciousness is at the bottom of the barrel. It's as if, I think we can look around the world and see a whole sort of death process going on, but at the same time, there are, out of that ending of the Piscean age that we've been in, there is a beautiful movement toward bringing back this ancient knowledge and connecting it with, with quantum physics, with technology in a benign way, and all these sorts of things. So yeah, this is a death rebirth moment, and bringing back the ancient knowledge of the goddesses and the stars, because in Abydos, the temple there was built as a healing temple, and it has 7 chapels to the major gods and goddesses of Egypt. And it is thought that the 7 chapels relate to the 7 sisters, the Pleiadian star system, which is sometimes called the 7 sisters. At the same time, each chapel is attuned to a different vibration. And so each chapel is also mirroring the different 7 major chakras of the body. And so it's this connection all the time between inner and outer, between above and below, between our inner suns as much as our outer inner suns and moons, as much as our outer suns and moons. So again, it's a vision of a unified world. In Egypt, the Milky Way is a reflection of the Nile and the river, which is the major river in Egypt, because every year it produces the water for the country, for the crops, and for everyone. And so there's this constant mirror between above and below, between masculine and feminine, all the time. And I like that very much, because they learn from nature, they see nature, and they see how it's mirrored in an individual life as much as an age, so yeah, it's a beautiful image of wholeness, really, for me. And I think this is what we're striving for now, to bring the broken parts back into a whole within ourselves and within culture.
How exhilarating. It's really exhilarating to think that we are alive in this moment, and we are finding those pieces. And I love so much to read where you have been walking in England, in France, in Egypt, and that all that knowledge is like all these little pieces. And talking to you, other women will get to know about it, and it's just the ripple effects of this.
Yes, I think that that is the hope, and the hope is too, I think that any one tiny thing that you might say might be a spark, might be a spark for something, for some reflection, some memory, and when I was teaching, I always used to love that, because you never know how your experience and what you say falls with patients or students or a situation like this. And so, yeah, that is the hope, that some piece might be a door opener. That is always my hope. And I that's what I loved about doing first of all, doing my own pilgrimages, walking solo, as I did across one of those paths in France, from Le Puy-en-Velay down to the southwest corner, Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, because what happened on that solo walk, when I would get up every morning and walk about anywhere between 20 and 30 kilometers, and then do it again, and then do it again, what happens is your mind starts to break down, your ego mind starts to break down. And what happened for me is that I developed this kind of felt sense. It wasn't just a walk in nature. What I came to feel was that I was contacting the spirit of nature and the soul of nature. And that was a life changer for me. When I experienced the earth, not just knowing about it intellectually, but I experienced the earth as a sentient being who, over the time of and period of my walk, that was over 2 years. I didn't do that long walk in one go. I did in 2 years, but over the time of that long walking, where I purposefully did it by myself, so I wouldn't get distracted with talk or be brought up to my ordinary local consciousness, ego consciousness every day. I didn't want that. I wanted to sink down, and that's what happened. And because I had already done some of the journeys to Peru and to Egypt the first time, to Greece, and France also, some of these places I've visited several times. What I felt at the sacred sites was that these were portal areas that were particularly permeable to the soul of the earth and from, the energy of the stars. And, and since that time, of course, with my reading and research about it, they were built specifically for that. It's like the crop circles in England. They tend to appear in areas that are known, from ancient times as Neolithic sites or stone circles or, other kinds of temple structures. And, the crop circles they're the spirit of the earth manifesting themselves together with the Star Nation people, as far as that is my current view of it. Because here you have these amazing geometric, and I work with a crop circle group, so I know from the sacred geometers in that group, I'm not one, but I know from them how precise the geometry of these formations are. And when you think of geometry as the sort of universal language of the cosmos, because geometry is true whether you believe it or not, it's a given, it's already there. We've discovered it, but it was already there. And so when you think of that eternal realm intersecting with nature, with earth, with crops that come and go every year, you already have a kind of mythic pattern of the immanence of the divine, of how spirit and matter are intimately connected, and how the spirit of the earth herself participates through the grain, through the crops, with this imprint, as it were, from, I'll say above. That may not be true literally, but that's what I'll say. And then you have a symbol that everyone can see, because you can look at them on internet sites, even if you don't go and visit them. But here again is another, and they're like temple structures. They don't last because they come and go each year, but they're, again, for me, as with UFO phenomena, they are signatures of a world that is trying to change. And these to me are like symbols or myths of any kind, that it behooves us to pay attention to them and to really allow ourselves to reflect, not only on where do they come from or how are they made, but what might they mean for us. And so again, it's this above and below connection, this invitation to a unified world. And the crop circles themselves are, for me, very much about the manifestation of the divine feminine, because they're nature. And they have vibrations. They incorporate vibrations that, if you enter them, and over the years I have a number of times, can change you, So yeah, this is all part of the recovery of the divine feminine for me, for sure.
It's so powerful. So oh God, I could go so many directions. You mentioned that you had something to show us. An image, or is that still relevant, or is
it was I have a couple of pictures of that I took this last time in Egypt, from the temple of Dendera, beautiful temple, of the goddess Nut and her stars, her star body.
So you have this realization of this memory of how important is that we're coming from the stars.
Yes.
Why is this so relevant? What is particularly relevant right now?
Well,
time.
my educational academic background and my personal interests allows me to look at stars from many different points of view. And this is also something that I find fascinating, because there are many ways of looking at stars, obviously. So, for example, just very briefly, you can think of stars as symbols, right? They're symbols in astrology, there are symbols of the zodiac, they're in tarot cards, etc. And they can represent, like the soul or the eternal highest value or something like that, or our longing for that. Stars can express that longing. They navigate, they're used for navigation. And, the stars in our dreams also guide us. And I have a dream that I'd like to share maybe a bit later on that has exactly to do with that. And the stars...
If you want to do that now? If you want to do that now?
I could, yeah. But just let me finish just to say, because about the feminine too, the stars are very much connected to the goddesses. So, for example, the star is the symbol of Venus and other goddesses as the morning and evening star. Venus is the morning and evening star. Isis is the queen of heaven, wears a crown of stars, and many of the queens of heaven, like the Virgin Mary and so on, have this halo of stars around them. And, we've already talked about Nut, but Isis, for example, is also connected with Sirius. And the pharaoh, in his resurrection rites and rituals, the aim of those, which was a sort of initiation in the Great Pyramid. This is what the pyramids were for. They were initiation chambers. The initiation would have to do with connecting with his star, with his eternal star, so that he would know that he was part of the cosmos, a cosmic being, and then he could come back and rule with that knowledge in his awareness. And I think this is part of why stars are so important, because connection with stars can change our attitude about the world and how we live in it. Anyway, stars, as I say, can come in our dreams. Now, this dream I had actually at the end of January, it was when I was really thinking about, because one day I sat down and I said, okay, now what do I really want to say? Because I actually started a whole thing on the divine feminine. And then I thought, well, no, I think Anne will probably talk much more coherently about that. So I won't do that. But then I just said, what I want to talk about. And I said, the voice came in, talk about the stars. And then very shortly after that, I had a dream in which I was with this young girl. I think it was my daughter when she was young. And we were upstairs in a building up on the first floor if you're European and English, but the second floor if you're American. And we were just sort of looking out at the evening sky. And then I look down and I see all the people on the ground floor level either leaning out of their windows or standing in the street, and they were all looking up to a different part of the sky. And so I follow their gaze to see where they're looking. And as I look up, I see the night sky as I've never seen it before. All the stars seemed incredibly sparkly, and they seemed so close. And I could actually see the Pleiades star system and the major 7, I think it's actually 9, but the major 7 stars in that cluster were just like diamonds. They were so close, I could see them, and they were so exquisitely beautiful. And then my gaze went from that. I mean, I was in a state of complete wonder, and then it moved slightly to the left, and I saw this UFO. It was shaped like a boomerang, actually, which is a very odd shape. I've never seen that shape really as a UFO shape, but it had different size lights coming off it. It was just beautiful to look at. And as you looked at it, it was coming apart from a larger mother ship, as it were, and it just glided slowly off into the night sky. It just was silent as anything. It just glided off. And then again, my gaze went slightly to the left again, and a cloud dispersed, and there was this most beautiful UFO ship that looked like a huge building with lights coming out of it, just sort of flashing and beaming out, but in a kind of gentle way. And it was just wondrous and exquisite to look at the whole thing, just a complete marvel. But the knowing in the dream, I knew in the dream that the advanced galactic beings were an undeniable reality. That was just true in the dream world. And it was a sort of confirmation that these other civilizations that have visited the earth since time immemorial, there's so much in the historical record about this and in different cultures, particularly indigenous cultures that have carried this knowledge, because it's part of their teachings. It's part of, when I worked with shamans, the star connection was always incredibly important, because the wisdom came from the stars, the knowledge came from the stars. They were the ancestors. They were the ones that some of the shamanic practitioners could travel to gain the knowledge and this sort of thing. And it was just a confirmation that here are other civilizations that just behind the veil are all around. There are higher frequency beings here to help us with the changes that we're going through. I heard 2 speakers recently speak about this too. One was a medical doctor, John Ryan. Another was a theoretical physicist, Adam Apollo, and they were both talking on Sacred Planet, Jocelyn Mercado's Sacred Planet, Into the Mythica, which was just earlier in January. And they were saying from their research how clear it seems to be, and from personal memories that people have of being connected to other civilizations, not of this earth, that they know that they've had incarnations on other planetary systems, that these beings are here because they've already gone through the process that we are in the middle of right now, this initiation into the redemption of the feminine and the recovery of our place in the galaxy and in the universe, and that they've already moved from a sort of planetary civilization to one that can travel. And all our physics now, physics are going to probably, I don't know whether in my lifetime, but certainly in younger people's lifetime, is going to show that we can use gravity in a different way. We're already going to the stars. I mean, so that they're here really not to interfere, but to support this deep and profound initiation process that the earth is going through at the moment.
This is
so that's hopeful. Where the stars can appear in dreams.
This is so hopeful.
Very hopeful. Very hopeful.
So hopeful. Yeah, because it makes sense if we really bring back the feminine. the whole consciousness of the planet, the whole consciousness of humanity has to rise. And then this, I almost find it egoistic, this ego idea that we're alone in the universe. It's just...
It's silly, isn't it?
It's just so, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
With so much space. And indeed, me with my Aztec background, this was the conversation Quetzalcoatl was a being from other place, who went in different incarnations as Kukulkan, as Amaru, every places. The ancient cultures knew this.
Yeah.
This is so hopeful.
It's so hopeful because we need, I mean, look at our world. We have all this knowledge and look at our world. It's just terrible. So we need a much vaster, comprehensive expansion of consciousness and a vision about who we are, where we come from, where we're going. The old order is simply not holding. It's not holding because it's so corrupt and split. That's why it's not working anymore. And COVID, as I think we mentioned, is maybe before we spoke, but this is a wake-up call that, you know, that even through COVID, we can see how interrelated we all are. But we as a civilization are completely out of touch with reality, as far as I'm concerned at this point. But once you realize that the world is unified and a one world, once you know that, not just as a theory, but because you've experienced it, like a dream is an experience. And in that dream, that was my experience. And when I walked those Camino paths, that was my experience. I am absolutely certain that not only the Earth, but the galaxy is a sentient body, and we are like drops of water on a vast ocean that we cannot even imagine. And even to take in some of that as an experience and not just an idea is to live differently, because you're no longer an isolated little pathetic being sitting in your apartment. You are non-locally connected to everything. And so that gives hope, as you say, and this will restore our connection to the sacred. This will restore our value system, and we can then use knowledge with wisdom instead of using it for nefarious ends.
Knowledge with wisdom. Of course, it's logical. It's obvious that the listeners are in different spiritual stages in their own spiritual journey. Yeah. Yes, and it's a very difficult question to give an advice, but for everybody. But if you may, how can we help the turning tide of bringing this divine feminine back with our little grain of sand in our lives? What would you say?
Well, I would say, first of all, that's an excellent question, because many people feel completely overwhelmed by what's going on at the moment. And I read an article in the New York Times that a friend sent me this morning, from yesterday, I think, or maybe Sunday, I'm not quite sure, about how the climate crisis is really causing tremendous psychological distress. So I think you start where you are. And, you know, it's often in every tradition cross-culturally that I've read and learned about, it is often something falling apart in your own life that opens the door. It could be a depression, it could be a realization, it could be an illness, it could be a relationship loss, it could be the death of a loved one, it could be loss of job, it could be anything that stops you in your tracks and makes you think, oh my God, I need now to really take this seriously. So I would say that's always the place to start. Or it might be a numinous experience of some kind that you have no idea and you want to find out more about it. It could be anything really. An experience in nature, a dream, something will wake you up. And that is always the starting point. And then from there, you can begin a journey. I would say that a journey when you wake up in that way is one that should never be taken alone. You need an other to reflect back to you, to relate with you as you're going through something like that. But if you can let the door open and you can find, be it therapist, be it coach, be it someone who will take your experience seriously, be it shaman. I've worked with shamans, also extremely helpful. Counselors of one kind or another. I do think it's important that one doesn't try to do this alone, because in communion with another who understands what, not your experience, but what you're going through, is enormously helpful and therapeutic to begin with. And then from that doorway opening, if you can step into it, then a whole world opens. Then you can be open to your dreams. Then you can be open to reading mythology. Then you can be open to a whole host of ways of re-educating yourself. Or you can join groups and find support that way. But your life will change. But to me, it's about taking your experience seriously. That's the starting point. And knowing, as others have known before you, that you are not alone, either personally or interpersonally or planetarily or galactically. And then it becomes more of an adventure, which is not to say that it isn't a process where you might go down into a lot of pain and suffering. But that is not always a bad thing, because depression, for example, is not pathology. It's not that there's something wrong with you. It's there's something right with you, that you're feeling, you're having an appropriate feeling for the situation that you're in. And then you can start to use the imagination to allow you to enter these deep waters and to find other people and other ways that you can begin to this search to find out who you really are and why are you really here. I mean, these in the end are the questions that we ask ourselves. And because this is what will give your life meaning. Will give your life a meaning that maybe there was no other way to get there except through what's happening to you right now. And that may be the interest you have in coming onto a program like this as a viewer. Certainly for me as a presenter, it's so I can share knowledge of, now I'm 70, of a fairly long life. And certainly since my teenage years have been involved in it. So, you know, you learn a few things along the way. And I mean, life is also an adventure. And there are difficult deaths, but there are also rebirths that come out of the effort and work that you put in to discover and rediscover who you really are. Yeah.
Oh, it's so beautiful. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love this idea of asking for help, because it's not about giving up. It's refusing to give up. Please do ask for help, and help helps really. It's in community that we heal. Absolutely. Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for those words. So to start rounding up our conversation.
Yes, we must.
I would like to ask you to call into your intuition on what we need to tell the ladies at home that will drive it all home.
The ladies at home, meaning the viewers?
The listeners.
The listeners. Well, you know what? The voice of a poet comes into my mind, and I'm not even sure which poet it is, which is a terrible thing to say. And props, you probably know, but it's some woman, I believe, who said, what are you going to do with this one wild, wonderful life? Something like that. That's what came into my heart when you asked that question.
Oh, so beautiful. So beautiful. So you have the power. You have the power. Just ask that question and just answer it with your life.
Yeah. And you're right about the power, by the way. You do. Every person has the power in themselves to change. And life can become more magical and more deep and more meaningful than you can possibly imagine once you start that journey.
Veronica, oh God, the pity of time. Thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate the conversation. I hope this is the first one of many. And thank you, everybody, for being here with us. Did you enjoy this? Here is a selection of other videos that I feel you will love. And please don't forget to subscribe, to like, and to share. Love and light.